There are moments in life that leave scars so deep that not even time can erase them. That night was one of those moments. The man who once swore to love and protect me had already destroyed my trust, turning my world into a living nightmare. But his betrayal wasn't enough. He wanted to break me completely. Suddenly, he grabbed my hair and pulled it so hard that I gasped in pain. Then he slapped me so brutally that I fell to the floor. My pregnant body hit the ground with a pain that pierced every fiber of my being. What happened next surpassed any horror I could have imagined. Hello, my name is Alina Carter, and I'm 28 years old. If a few years ago someone had told me that my life would turn into a nightmare before transforming into something much bigger than I ever imagined, I would have laughed. But life has its way of showing us the truth in the most brutal ways. I was once a woman who believed in love, in promises and in forevers. I thought that marriage was based on trust and devotion, but I was very wrong, terribly wrong. I met Damian Wells when I was 23 years old in a city where I dreamed of building my future, Everwood. Back then, I was just an ordinary fashion designer working in a small boutique, hoping to one day launch my own brand. Damian, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Rich, self-assured, and dangerously charming. From the moment he walked into that boutique with his irresistible smile, I felt drawn to him like a moth to a flame. "You designed this?" he asked, holding an elegant black dress. I nodded shyly. "Yes, I did." "It's impressive," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "Like you." And that's how he conquered me. For months, he showered me with attention, expensive dinners, and sweet promises about our future together. He made me feel special, chosen, loved. When he proposed, I didn't even hesitate. I said yes, convinced that I had found the man of my dreams. But dreams can turn into nightmares much faster than you imagine. The first time I met Margaret Wells, Damian's mother, I realized immediately that I was nothing more than a stranger in her world. She was the director of Wells Global Enterprises, a luxury real estate empire, and she made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. It was at a huge party at the Wells mansion. I arrived in the best dress I could afford, hoping to make a good impression. But when Margaret looked at me, her cold eyes scanned me from head to toe as if I were a stain on her perfect world. "You're the designer my son has been so obsessed with," she said, swirling her wine glass with a fake smile. "How unexpected." Damian squeezed my hand reassuringly, but deep down I knew I wasn't welcome. From that night on, everything began to change. The man who once adored me slowly began to pull away. He spent more time at work, more time at his mother's estate, and less time with me. When I was 7 months pregnant, our apartment felt full of silence and tension. The man who used to hold me at night now barely looked at me. And then on one fateful night, he shattered my world completely. I still remember that night like a burn scar on my soul. The apartment was silent, too silent. I sat on the couch, rubbing my swollen belly and trying to ignore the sharp pain in my back. I was 7 months pregnant, expecting Damian's twins. I should have felt happy, excited about the future, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. Damian had been avoiding me for weeks, barely speaking to me. He came home late, and when he did, he smelled of an expensive perfume that wasn't mine. My gut knew what my heart refused to accept, and that night it finally happened. Damian entered the apartment with a cold face and empty eyes. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he stood at the door with his hands clenched into fists, as if preparing for a fight. "I can't do this anymore, Alina." My heart stopped. I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He exhaled sharply and rubbed his forehead. "I mean, I'm done with you. With this. With everything." His words pierced me like a dagger. "You're leaving me?" My voice broke. Damian finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw the truth. The man I had loved was no longer there. "My mother was right," he said in a cold, distant tone. "You don't belong in my world." I should have listened to her from the beginning. I felt as if the ground was vanishing beneath my feet. I placed a hand on my belly, feeling a protective instinct ignite within me. "Damian, please. We're about to have children together. This isn't just about us anymore." He let out a bitter laugh. "That's precisely the problem. I never wanted this, Alina. I don't want you, and I certainly don't want to be a father." The world spun. My body felt weak, but I refused to break. So that's it. I whispered. You're choosing money over us? Your mother's approval over your own children. Damien's face twisted with frustration. You don't understand. If I stay with you, I lose everything. The money, the business, my future. And for what? For a life I never wanted. Tears blurred my vision. The man in front of me was a complete stranger. A coward who had chosen greed over love. I should have stayed silent, let him go. But my pain turned into rage. You're a pathetic excuse for a man. I spat, my voice shaking. You're nothing without your mother's money, without me. And one day you'll realize you lost the only people who truly mattered. That's when it happened. Damien's jaw tensed, his eyes darkened, and in an instant, his hand flew towards me. The slap was so hard and brutal that pain exploded in my cheek. I gasped, my head snapping to the side, my vision blurring between shock and tears. But before I could react, he grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked it hard, forcing me to look at him. You can't talk to me like that, he growled, his face inches from mine. You're nothing without me, Alina. Nothing. I winced as my scalp burned. My heart hammered against my chest. My body trembled, not with fear but with fury. I looked him directly in the eyes, refusing to let him see me break. No, Damien, I said with dangerous calm, despite the tears in my eyes. I am everything without you. And one day you will beg for my forgiveness. He scoffed, shoving me as if I were worthless. Don't count on it. And without another word, he walked out the door, leaving me alone, pregnant, broken, and abandoned. I touched my burning cheek, breathing heavily, shaking. But something inside me had changed. I knew I would never let Damien or his mother win. One day I would rise from the ashes, and when that day came, I would take everything from them, just as he had taken it from me. The night Damien walked out of my life, I felt a part of me die. For hours I sat on the cold floor, my hand still pressed against my aching cheek, my hair tangled from his pull. I was trembling not just from pain, but from anger, humiliation, and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, break something, cry until I had no tears left. But then, a small movement in my belly reminded me that I was not alone. My babies were still there, still depending on me. And it was in that moment that the truth hit me like a wave of fire. Damien had left, believing that I would crumble, convinced that I couldn't get back up without him. Damien had chosen his mother's wealth over our family, convinced that without her money, her name, and her power, he would be nothing. But he was wrong. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to rise. The next few months were the hardest of my life. With no financial support, no husband, and no family to rely on, I was completely alone. Margaret Wells, Damien's mother, made sure I was left with nothing. She used her influence to evict me from the apartment we had shared. She froze all our joint accounts, ensuring that not a single dollar reached my hands. I was homeless, 7 months pregnant, and completely destitute. I knocked on doors, begged for help, but no one wanted to get involved. Damien's family had too much power, too much influence. If anyone helped me, they risked facing the wrath of the Wellses. I'm sorry, Alina, but I can't put my business at risk. I'd love to help, but I can't afford to lose my job. Maybe you should go back and beg Damien. He's the father after all. But I refused. I would rather starve on the streets than crawl back to the man who had destroyed me. So I did what I had to do. I took any job I could find. I worked cleaning shifts in motels, waitressing in a rundown diner during the nights, and even sewed clothes for a local tailor. My feet swelled, my back ached, but I didn't stop. I barely slept, barely ate. Every dollar I earned I saved because I knew that one day it would all be worth it. When the time came, I gave birth in a cheap, overcrowded hospital. Alone. No husband to hold my hand. No family waiting outside. Just me. The pain was unbearable. But as soon as I heard their first cries, a boy and a girl, all the suffering vanished. I held them close, feeling their warmth, their life. They were so small, so fragile. I will never let anyone hurt you, I whispered as tears streamed down my face. I gave them names that belonged to no one but them, Luca and Mia. No connection to Damien. No part of his legacy. I refused to put his name on their birth certificates. To us he was already dead. But deep down I knew the truth. One day he would regret everything. One day, he would realize he had left behind the only thing that truly mattered. But by then it would be too late. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to win. Damien and Margaret thought they had destroyed me, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I was going to be more successful than Damien could ever imagine. I would build something bigger than his family's empire, and when the time was right, I would take it all away from him. But I knew I couldn't do it overnight. I needed time. I needed a plan. And that's when I realized I had a skill that Damien's family had never taken seriously: fashion. For years I had designed dresses, worked in boutiques, and dreamed of having my own brand. I had always been too afraid to pursue that dream, but not anymore. If people wouldn't give me a chance, I was going to give it to myself. At night, when the twins were asleep, I would draw, cut fabric, and sew by hand. I poured every drop of my pain, my anger, and my determination into my work. Then one day an idea struck me. A high-profile charity gala was approaching, hosted by some of the richest families in the city, including the Wells family. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to attend that gala. I was going to make sure that every person there remembered my name. That night would be the first step towards my revenge. I had nothing. No status, no connections, no invitation. But I had talent and a plan. The Wells family hosted one of the most prestigious charity galas of the year, an event where the rich and powerful flaunted their wealth, wearing designer dresses, sipping expensive champagne, and pretending to care about charity. Margaret Wells would be there. Damien would be there. And so would I. Not as a guest, but as a storm ready to sweep everything away. Every moment the twins slept, I dedicated to designing, sewing, and perfecting the dress that would change my destiny. A dress so stunning, so unique that no one would dare ignore me. It was a deep crimson, a color that screamed confidence and danger. The fabric hugged the body like a second skin, flowing in soft layers that resembled liquid fire. The open back design revealed just enough to be daring, but without losing elegance. A delicate silver thread ran through the fabric like lightning across a stormy sky. "If they don't give me a seat at their table," I murmured, my fingers tracing the final stitches, "I'm going to burn the whole damn table down." The night of the gala, I arrived uninvited. No one noticed me at first. I was just another woman getting out of a cab. My heels clicked against the marble pavement as I ascended the grand staircase. But then they saw the dress. The moment I stepped inside, heads turned. Women gasped. Men couldn't help but stare. And whispers began to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Who is she? That dress is breathtaking. I've never seen anything like it." I walked with purpose, my chin held high, pretending I belonged there. Because that night I did belong. And then my eyes met those of Margaret and Damien Wells, right in the center of the room, surrounded by their elite circle. Margaret, as always, looked serene, sipping her wine like a queen surveying her kingdom. Damien stood beside her, looking as polished and powerful as ever. But when our eyes met, he froze. For the first time since he left me broken and pregnant, Damien Wells saw me, and he encountered something he never expected. I wasn't the helpless woman he had abandoned. I was fire. I was power. I was his biggest mistake. Damien's mouth opened slightly. Surprise flickered in his eyes. I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. He took a step forward as if he needed to confirm that I was real. "Alina." His voice was barely a whisper. Margaret followed his gaze, her usual expression of arrogance fading into something unreadable. She studied me, her eyes narrowing as if trying to piece together a puzzle without realizing she was missing pieces. "You shouldn't be here," she finally said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. I took a sip of the champagne I had just lifted from a passing waiter's tray, savoring every second. "Oh, but I should," I replied softly. "You see, Margaret, I belong here more than you think." Margaret's lips became a thin line. "You're nobody." I let out a soft laugh. Not for long. And that was the truth. Because tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about making sure the world knew my name. Before Margaret or Damien could react, a woman approached me. She was a socialite with connections in the fashion industry. "Darling, that dress is exquisite. Who designed it?" I smiled. "I did." She gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. "You're a designer? Do you have a label?" "Not yet," I said, taking another sip of champagne. "But I will very soon." And just like that, the first step of my plan was set in motion. Margaret and Damien could only watch as I was swept from one conversation to another, as people begged to know where they could buy my designs. That night, I didn't just leave with attention. I left with my first real opportunity. As I passed Damien one last time, I leaned in close enough to whisper, "This is just the beginning." Without looking back, I disappeared into the night, leaving him standing there watching me go, just as he had done to me once. Only this time I was the one with all the power. The night of the gala had changed everything. I was no longer just the ex-wife Damien had abandoned. Now I was a name everyone wanted to know. The next morning my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Designers, journalists, and members of high society were all asking the same question. Who is Alina Carter? My name Alina Carter went viral. Hollywood stylists started seeking me out. Models wanted to wear my pieces. Luxury magazines began featuring my work. Suddenly, I wasn't just a fashion designer. I was a threat. As my star ascended, Damien's world crumbled. Wells Global Enterprises, an empire that once seemed untouchable, was losing money by the truckload. Bad investments, a failing economy, and worst of all, Margaret's iron-fisted control were driving the company to the brink of collapse. I didn't miss a beat. I kept an eye on the news, watching as Damien and his mother struggled to keep their business afloat. Wells Global faces severe financial losses. Investors pull out due to mismanagement. Once mighty real estate empire on the verge of collapse. Every headline brought a smile to my face. But I wasn't finished. I didn't just want to see Damien suffer. I wanted to be the reason he lost everything. So I made my move. I used silent investors, people who believed in my vision, to start buying shares of Wells Global. Little by little, I gained control, making sure my name never appeared on the records. Until the day came when I owned the majority of the shares. And that's when I received the official invitation to the Wells Global board meeting. The same company that had discarded me was now in my hands. It was time for Damien and Margaret to find out the hard way. I arrived at Wells Global headquarters in a black power suit, my heels echoing against the marble floors. Executives, shareholders, and board members filled the enormous conference room, murmuring about the company's imminent downfall. At the head of the table sat Margaret, her usual cold confidence beginning to crack. Beside her was Damien, the man who once thought I was beneath him. But today I was above them all. I walked in and every eye in the room locked onto me. I placed a folder on the table and said firmly, "As of today, I own the majority of shares of Wells Global Enterprises." Silence fell like a stone. Damien's face paled, and Margaret's lips parted slightly in disbelief. "No, this is a mistake," Margaret stammered, flipping through the documents with trembling hands. This is impossible." "Impossible." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but sharp. "The only mistake was underestimating me, Margaret." Damien finally spoke, his voice strained. "Alina, you did all of this." I looked him directly in the eyes, and for the first time in years I felt nothing for him. No pain, no regret, no love. Only deep satisfaction. "I built something from nothing, Damien, while you were busy protecting your mother's empire. I was creating my own." His hands clenched into fists. "You can't do this." I smiled, letting every word sink into his pride. "I already did." And then I delivered the final blow. "As the new majority shareholder, my first official act is to remove both you and Margaret from your positions." Damien rose from his chair, fury burning in his eyes. "You can't." My palm connected with his cheek with such force that the sound echoed through the boardroom. Damien staggered back, his face burning both from the slap and the humiliation. Before he could react, I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, pulled him close, and whispered so only he could hear. "This is for that night you hit me. For every time you pulled my hair and left me to suffer alone." I released him, watching him struggle to process what had just happened. Then I turned to Margaret. Her gaze was pure hatred. But there was something else in her eyes, fear. She knew I had taken everything, and there was nothing she could do to stop me. Without another word, I turned on my heels and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Damien and Margaret among the ruins of the empire they once ruled. That night, when I arrived home, Luca and Mia ran into my arms. "Did you win, Mommy?" Mia asked, looking up at me with those bright, innocent eyes. I smiled, stroking her soft curls. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered. I won. Because revenge wasn't just about destroying them, it was about rebuilding myself. It wasn't just about ruining Damien's life. It was about building a life so powerful and successful that he no longer had the ability to define me. I rose. And I did it without him.